In this video, we're going to take a look at the difference between inserting an effect on a track versus using the auxiliary sends and returns. So I'm going to use a track that I've been working on, and I'm going to solo up the drums right here. I've got a loop segment right here. You can see that. I got the loop brackets on between bar 24 and 32 here. And I'm soloing up two groups. Well, for starters, I'm going to solo up the top group. It's called the top drums. These red drums right here. In this segment, it's got an ambient spatial effect on a snare, and it's got a hi-hat clicking through it. Let's take a listen to that. So let's take a look at the processing on this. This particular delay snare that you're hearing, it's in a drum rack, and you can see the sample right here. I can trigger it down here on the bottom. And you can see that directly adjacent to it, I've inserted a dotted eighth note delay. So in this case, it's a ping-ponging delay. I've set it to ping-pong. Difference being, if it's in ping-pong mode, the delay moves from left to right in your speakers or your headphones, so you're probably hearing that bouncing back and forth. If I take it off, you'll just hear the direct signal here. And you'll also notice that there's some natural decay on the snare, or what we would always also refer to as reverb. And you can see it fading out right here. You see I've got a fade on here. So that's just a 1.2 second fade on the sample because the sample itself has some reverb on it. So what we're going to do now is, I've got the insert here. Let's take a look at that, how that works. The key thing to understand with inserts is that you're blending the effect and the dry signal when you use an insert directly on the effect processor itself. So you'll notice here on the bottom right, there is a dry, wet knob down here, and I've got it at 49, effectively 50% here. So that means it's half dry signal, half wet. If I turn it all the way to the left, that means it's all dry, and I'm not going to hear the effect. Just that raw sample there. And as I bring this up now, I'm going to start to bring up the effect. If I bring it all the way up 100%, it's only going to be the effect, so I won't hear the initial transient of that snare. I'm only going to hear the ping-pong effect of it. There you go. So I want to hear the initial, and then I want to hear a lot of the effect. So I'm going to bleed it a little heavy to the right here. So I get a nice combination of the two. I'm also adding a little extra reverb on top of that. And you can see that over here. Let's see where I just passed it by. Yeah, there it is. So here, there's a dark snare room. Let's take a look at that. This is one of Ableton 11's hybrid reverbs, meaning that it's a combination of two reverbs in one. I've got the convolution IR, IR standing for impulse response, meaning somebody actually sampled this in a room. This is a nice one called Made for Drums with the big snare on it. So it's already preset to that. And again, I've got my dry wet mix right here. So I'm making this one pretty wet, again, because this is an ambient sounding effect that I'm using in the track. So I want it to be very spatial. So I'm using a lot of effects processing. That's why I'm using the inserts here, because I want to really soak this guy up and make it very wet sounding. So I'm inserting the reverbs right on the track, using the dry wet mix here to create the blend. Now obviously there's a lot of other processing going on in this reverb, and we'll get into detail on that in another reverb. I'm just trying to make you understand here the difference between inserts and sends on this particular video. So below that we've got a hat kit down here. So this hat here is this guy right here. You'll notice that it is kind of wet too. It's got a bit of reverb on it, right? There's a little bit of a large shimmer plate here. And again, I'm using the hybrid reverb that's giving me a little convolution IR. So it's allowing me to use the same reverb that I used on the delay snare above, but I'm blending that with this very shimmery algorithmic reverb here that's really nice on the hi-hat. It gives it a big shimmer up on top. So these this one I'm just kind of bleeding it a little bit. You'll notice it's at 23% here. Let's hear those two together. Now you might also notice here that hi-hat's moving around a little bit. If you're listening to this in stereo, you should be hearing that hi-hat move around. How are we doing that? Well, I'm inserting another effect directly after, at the end of this chain here, so that it's moving the entire imaging around. So this is an auto pan. So you'll notice that hi-hat is moving at the rate of 1 bar. So every bar, it's moving around, 2, 3, 4, and moving. And it's moving at an amount of about 58% here. It's using a sine wave, so it's a smooth kind of movement going back and forth. I can make it move a lot faster. You can hear at that speed, it's fluttering almost the way it's moving so fast, or a lot slower. In this case, I found that 1 bar was perfect for this. Kind of giving it nice slow motion in time with the track. And it's got a nice feel to it. It's, nice motion in my headphones along with the ping pong that's going on the snare. So now all of these are being inserted directly on the track. I can go over here to my effects, and the way you insert these things is you grab the effect that you're looking for. Say it's an echo or a filter delay or whatever it is, and you simply drag it right onto the track. And by doing that, I can drop it right in there. Now, I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want to hang up my session. Looks like I already did hang up my session a little bit. We'll let that go. It should clear out in a second. And so these inserts are great, especially when you want to go heavy on the effect. Now, why would you then use the auxiliary sends? The auxiliary sends are really nice when you want to share an effect across multiple tracks. And particularly like with reverbs, when you want to put everything in a similar sounding room to kind of glue them together and make them all feel cohesive. Now, rule of thumb in traditional mixing is that you would have reverbs and delays on auxiliary sends, and that you would use inserts for dynamic bass processing like compressors or for EQs. But that rule of thumb kind of went out the window a while ago, especially now that we've got this ability to create dry-wet mixing right on the insert. But when I want to share an effect and kind of glue things together, I'm definitely going to use my auxiliary sends. And my auxiliary sends are right over here. You can see me kind of circling them over here on the right side here. And if I flip over to my mixer, and I'm going to scroll over here on my mixer to the same section here, and here it is right here. You can see the auxiliary sends really nicely here. It's very clear. So here I'm using auxiliary send A across these various different drum tracks in this particular group. Auxiliary send A is sending to return channel A. So when I go to inserts here, remember I can insert an audio track, a MIDI track, or a return track. These are the 3 kind of tracks that I get in Ableton. And this particular insert here, or this return track I should say, has its own insert on it. And I put yet another one of those hybrid reverbs there with a dark snare room, kind of making that dark snare the kind of the cohesive reverb for this entire segment of these top drums. Again, I've got a convolution reverb here and an algorithmic reverb over here, and I'm actually able to blend the 2 of those as well. That's 100% algorithmic versus 100% convolution, and by bringing those 2 together, I get a nice bleed between the 2. Now, also point to notice here is when I'm using a reverb on a return, I'm generally going to have that at 100% wet, because I'm blending the dry signal, which is over here on the track itself, with the wet signal over here, much like I'm doing with the mix level on the insert. Again, here's that insert, right? But in this case, it's on the return, so I'm going to make it 100% wet. Okay, and now I'm going to just use this send to bleed that dry signal into the effect and then mix that level of the return right here. So I have the ability to mix my 100% wet return right here on the right. Okay, Just for example purposes, I'm going to show you a couple other effects that I'm using for inserts here. Let's take a quick look down here. I'm going to bring in another group, the big drums on the bottom, so we're going to hear some kick now. Oh yeah, we're going to hear some kick. We're going to hear a little percussion. Now here we've got a shaker. Let's take a look at that. Let's solo up that shaker down here. I'm going to unsolo the whole group on the big drums here. So now we're just going to hear the shaker along with our snare and hi-hat that we had on the other track. And you'll notice here on the shaker track, when I click on the track itself, you can now see the inserted effects on that track. In this case, I've got a high-pass filter, EQ. I've got an auto filter, which currently is not being used. You can see it's bypassed by not having this yellow